welcome to episode 7 of the IQ Business Artificial Intelligence podcast. And today in our studio, we are incredibly fortunate to be sitting with Ayanda Ngcebetsha from Microsoft. Ayanda is the Data Analytics and AI Director for Microsoft South Africa. Today, we're going to be discussing a bit about his journey and his observations in AI with the emergence of things like large language models. We're also going to be talking about Copilots and spending quite a bit of the conversation today talking about how organizations should be engaging with all of these new tools, how to embed Copilots, what the best practices are from a strategic and operational perspective, and generally just talking all things AI. Very warm welcome to you, Ayanda.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Tim. So great to be here. And thank you for the invitation, to yourself and Josh. As a way of introduction, I come from Port Elizabeth in the Eastern Cape. It's now called Tebega. And, that's when I was born and bred, and I started out my career. So I've got a background in software development. And that's how I started off my career. In fact, exactly 21 years ago, in February, it's going to be 21 years since I walked into this wonderful space of technology, in software development. I did software development for a good couple of years. And then I started to move up to move into more, business-like roles and leading up to, some leadership roles. So I come from public service. So I worked for a municipality. I left I was the CIO at the time, and we had done some wonderful projects, right? At that time, we had something called e-government. We were driving a lot of automation, learned a lot, in terms of how to automate business processes. We were, extending infrastructure to cover underserviced areas, just to make sure that we were inclusive in how we take technology services to the people. So really exciting time, the time that I spent, in public service. And then I moved on and I started, moving into the service provider space. And this is where then, engaging with customers and solving other people's problems and using technology as a lever to solve problems really took center stage. And when I joined Microsoft, some 6 years ago now, I was in a leadership role in the public sector team charged with growing the public sector business and driving some of the digital transformation across, public service in Southern Africa. So used to do the neighboring countries as well in terms of driving that. But having a solid tech background, I think what drew me closer to AI and the use of data, every single conversation about transformation touched on data. It touched on simplification. It touched on how do we democratize this data? How do we use this data? And when I was busy with a master's program I was doing, I then started to pivot my research dissertation on data, on how we begin to democratize data and the business models around democratization of data. And this really led me into my current role, because it was through, studying data cultures and studying organizations that really do well in terms of driving, democratizing data, that, internally within Microsoft, then, we started having this focus, which led me into the current role that I am now. So it's, having had a solid tech career and then moved into more customer facing, and now back into tech in the exciting world of data and AI, it's been amazing.
It's an amazing journey. I must share a little secret. I'm also from the Eastern Cape, so not too far from you. Grew up in East London. Okay. So it's nice to end up in a space with you again. Okay, that's absolutely fascinating and possibly worth touching on kind of the democratization of data a little bit later. And I think, the opportunity that these tools represent for, really bringing any organizations, but especially government, into places that are far more efficient and effective is obviously really profound. It's something that's sorely needed in South Africa. So nice to hear that there have been some wins there. What has the last 2 years been like? Obviously it's kind of the journey. There's been so much promise. There have been multiple different hype cycles in AI, even in digital transformation. But, suddenly we're in a space where things have accelerated really dramatically. And, through the course of last year, this new species of artificial intelligence kind of landed on the scene and very much landed in the Microsoft scene as well, with alignment with OpenAI and its equity stake in the business. What's that been like for you to observe? Has it felt like just another hype cycle, or has it felt like something materially has shifted this time around? Now, how have you responded as a business, and just what's it been like on your side through this last little while?
Yeah, I think the hype around generative AI has been real, especially in enterprise South Africa and in the businesses that we deal with. I think organizations are starting to ask themselves now, what are we doing in the space of AI? And when they ask that question, it's in the space of generative AI. But remember, AI has been around a long time, right? So I think what I've seen in the last couple of months since the large language models went mainstream is democratization of AI, right? Is also kind of leveling the playing field in terms of the availability of such models and AI capability to people that ordinarily wouldn't have had it in the past. So we see organizations starting to take notice and say, how can this help my business? How does it help me to connect to my customers better? How do I drive better efficiencies? How do I, drive customer retention, for example, in the different kind of businesses? And we see, personally, I've been in more board meetings across enterprise South Africa talking about AI now, probably in the last 5 years combined. And this is the interest that at board level, at exco level, the curiosity to say, are we being left behind? What's the cost of doing nothing? And I see the nervousness around it as well. Do we move fast or do we delay? And so that is still taking place right now. So it is a hype, but I think there are some people that have gotten it right early, and while some others are still trying to make sense of it. But it's been phenomenal in terms of the interest, in terms of trying not to be deliberate in terms of infusing AI into the strategy of businesses. I see that more and more.
So you've touched on a couple of interesting concepts that we've debated extensively in previous podcasts. So the first is this like almost organizational dilemma about like, when do you act? So this fear of being left behind, but like kind of at the same time realizing that the ground beneath our feet is still moving. So it's not like we're in sort of final state product in a lot of this.
Yeah.
There's constantly evolving releases in fundamental underlying models, which many organizations are building, and I'd imagine the Copilot works to some extent like this as well. But be nice to hear from you. It's leveraging the underlying models that have been produced by the likes of OpenAI. And as we see them evolve, you can get very different outputs in sequential updates. So the differences between GPT 3.5 and 4, and I think now recently there was a patch to try to keep the models less lazy. So some of the responses that are coming back from GPT-4 have got a little bit, you ask it to list 10 ... and it tells you 2 and it says ... You can kind of imagine the rest. It seems like it's trying to conserve some resources somewhere. But the bottom line is that the substrate's changing. So it's a natural ambivalence for business leaders to say, well, when do I build? Like, how much of my architecture is going to be built upon a foundation that's moving as well? So kind of what's the right timing to kind of jump into this morass of like, credible promise, but at the same time, it has the jelly set. I mean, what do you advise boards and exco members when you have these conversations? Where does the conversation go, in as much as you can share?
Yeah, so I think it always goes back to use cases that drive value. And we always pivot the conversation around how can AI, I mean, you've developed a business strategy now. So you in this market, and this is how you want to grow, this is how you want to accelerate. So all your objectives as a business, all of the wonderful things that the board and the exco come to do. And then we start to have conversations around which of those, could we potentially look at use cases in terms of driving that? Maybe you want to access net new customers. You want to attract net new customers. We find, especially in financial services and retail, a lot of saying, how do I tap into new markets and tap into maybe customers that are with my competition in terms of driving that? So it's always aligned to either the growth strategy of a business, or sometimes, a lot of companies right now are driving efficiency, saying, hey, I've got so much resources, how can I stretch them using AI, right? In terms of stretching my available resources without investing in more people, without, further investment. So we always seeing the people that delay maybe a bit and not to take the knee-jerk reaction of wanting to be first, are the people that have more profound use cases for their businesses, and not necessarily, say, the fear of missing out and the fear of being second or third in your industry. We see more quality use cases in that, but we're also starting to see some companies, and similar to what we saw during COVID, right? COVID showed us companies, organizations that invested in their culture, in their people, process, technology, weathered the storms better of COVID than others. Even in the hype around AI, really organizations that had the right digital platforms, they had the right people, they had the right culture, we see them accelerating time to value for AI a lot quicker than companies who are starting from scratch, who are still building the foundational, capabilities in order to do that. And there's no one size fits all. I think it just depends where you are as a company. We see some companies accelerating more than others.
I think that's really useful, and what I hear from that, and it's interesting, is to kind of mirror our own journey and the advice that we give to our customers, is that maybe it sounds a little bit trite, but you got to start with a plan. You got to have a sense of what you think it is that AI is going to do in your organization. Yeah. And you've described very clearly two different bookends. The one is, how am I going to use AI to grow? And that might be to attract new customers. It might also be to create new value propositions for customers. So everything that talks to the revenue side of your business. And the second side is everything that talks to the cost side of your business, the optimization front. And as we share more with our listeners what we think that the organizational adoption strategy should be, this is a very important point, because it's a framing that we've taken internally as well. You have to be clear on where your use cases sit. Are they going to be to create new value for customers, or are they going to be used to optimize functions? I think that there's a real danger in having a really flashy new toy that just sucks your time and attention in without any guided direction. Gartner recently, as they always do, released a model with some quadrants where they spoke about different ways that AI can be used in an organization to get different levels of change, from game-changing change to sort of more incremental change. And Josh, perhaps you could talk us through that model, because for an organization that wants to look at it in more sophisticated terms, not just kind of the binary axes that Ayanda and I described around cost savings and sales efficiency, there's kind of two more dimensions as well that we could talk through.
Yeah, sure. I think it is quite an interesting model, and I think the purpose of it is to allow enterprises to adequately and efficiently identify where those opportunities lie. And I think it's a very simple radar diagram. I think Gartner loves radar diagrams and more graphs. And the two axes, I think on one axis is essentially from everyday activities to game-changing type of initiatives. And then on the other axis, it's front office and back office. So if you think of every enterprise has front office and back office, and when you combine that with the game-changing and everyday AI dimensions, creates 4 quadrants that allow you to identify where initiatives lie, and then you can start scoping out what the potential value of those and priorities and specific tactical type of initiatives to carry that out. One thing you mentioned, Ayanda, that I wanted to maybe delve a bit, if possible, deeper in. I think in South Africa, and I guess it's the same globally, of course, not every enterprise is starting at the same level of technology and skills, you know what I mean? And now we have generative AI. And I think from our own experience, many South African companies are still on the cloud migration front. You know what I mean? Going from on-premise data, slower, sometimes legacy systems. I won't name the companies that represent.
And surprisingly, many are going back to on-prem. I mean, it seems to be a return back to bricks and mortar. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that there's a bit of catching up, and I think maybe some of those companies won't be part of early adopters that you mentioned, but I think this is going to be a game of waves. You know what I mean? You're going to have your early adopters, and you're going to have the second wave of people who are going to be still who should right now be getting the fundamentals right. And maybe you can speak about what should a company who maybe is thinking about or very excited about generative AI, but they still have some of the legacy systems, they don't have the advanced cloud data stores, etc. How would you advise them to get started there to plan for that eventual leap into generative AI?
Funny enough, we recently concluded a deal with very large public sector customer, another flagship public sector customer. So I think the case study would be out in a few weeks. But this is one of the flagship public sector organizations in South Africa that's been fully on-prem in terms of their strategy. AI pulled them into a hybrid strategy. The use cases made sense so much that they had to then change into a hybrid strategy to say, we want to make use of these capabilities because we can't build them in-house. And one of the things, and you'll know the investment that has gone into these GPUs that power these models. You can't just buy them and stuck it, down the staircase into your server room, right? So what we starting to see is with the power of these large language models and the GPUs required to power them, organizations that have previously had, being hesitant to go to cloud are now starting to say, how do I build a hybrid strategy approach? What of my assets that are needed by this model that I need to expose to this model that needs to come through and be exposed to the model online in the cloud? And what is it that sits on-prem? We see that across the board. I think the foreseeable future is hybrid. Yes, there are born in the cloud companies that don't have legacy and they do very well. But most corporate South Africa, we see hybrid as the way to go. And how you begin to integrate the AI strategy into your hybrid strategy is very key. What are you going to deliver that sits online, the advanced capabilities that you can't really do on-prem? And how do you begin to do that? So we have a lot of customers that we walk that journey with them in terms of having a hybrid environment to be able to do that. But also, I think, the investment in terms of driving these advanced AI workloads, especially at scale and volumes that we want to do, it's not, something that many organizations have the balance sheet to go and finance and be able to do that. So they'll continue to consume that as a service. I'm one of the people that believe that there is still case for on-prem, usage. But when you really want to do things that really transform your business and you want to activate really advanced services, then there is a case to move to the cloud. Hence, I personally believe, and I see it every day, that hybrid is still the way to go for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, there's a lot in that I want to come back to. I think there's conversations that we can take our listeners through around kind of what a hybrid architecture might look like. How does a closed box LLM even work? I mean, how we can exchange processes between on-prem and up into the cloud, as well as kind of some of the concepts you mentioned around scale. But I think before we do that, I want to just discuss briefly the idea of setting the organization structure up in such a way that it's able to exploit the AI opportunity. So maybe the framing here is that you've got businesses, they've got kind of their way of doing things, and like any big change that comes, and enterprises now then got to grapple with this idea of how do they create an adoption, a structural strategy effectively to maximize the success of adoption. Now we're talking about big enterprises. There might be governments, there might be businesses of a couple of thousand people, or even more than that. And it seems that we can identify kind of what we want to do. We know that we want to ultimately reduce costs and we want to grow the business and we want to find quick wins. But now you sort of get into the practical part of how do I go and harness different teams and sort of get them into a cadence of working in a way that I suppose makes everybody mindful of the size of the opportunity, but also focused on where they should be spending their attention. How have you thought about this, or how has Microsoft thought about this as an organization? And I'd love to share with you how we've thought about it as a business as well. But could we spend a couple of minutes just on that? So how do you get the business ready? And maybe it's not even an AI question. It's like a change management question. Like, how do you get the business ready to exploit this incredible opportunity?
Yeah, I think firstly, where we see successes, and this is what we proactively even advise our customers, is not to look at AI transformation as technology transformation, but rather as a business transformation. You have ownership of use cases, ownership of execution, ownership of the strategy in terms of the end goal, in terms of seeing the end from the beginning, sitting inside business. This is where we see a lot of success, because when it's sitting inside business, it forces you to embed it in what you do every day as a business. It's not something that comes from those guys. It's now ours, right? I come from an environment, 10 years ago in an IT field when I was CIO. It was me on the other side as a CIO. It was the business on the other side. It was me trying to tell the business what to do. But what I've seen working so well now is when these business transformation initiatives are embedded in the business, they become part and parcel of the fabric of the business. Ownership, it takes place at the business. Technology simply becomes an enabler. We've seen projects get ownership, get sponsorship, and then getting to fruition by being embedded within the business. So there's no business strategy and an AI strategy. There's a business strategy enabled by AI. And I think if we begin to change to that construct. I've got one CIO that I met and I said, hey, can you, share your RT strategy with me? I need to be able to map against it just to see, how we can better support you. He says, I don't have one. He says, we have a business strategy here. He says, all the enabling services are embedded within our business strategy. And if you think about it, that's how really it should be. He says, everything we do to support this organization in achieving its objectives is embedded within that strategy. So I don't have a standalone document I can share with you. Here's my business strategy, and here I'm enabling. Show me how you can then help support me in driving that. I think when we start to look at strategy that way, we start to then embed everything that we need from a resourcing perspective in order to achieve the objectives.
That's an interesting way of looking at it. I suppose the part that it could come unstuck at is exactly the last sentence you had where you say the resourcing required. It kind of hinges on the fact that the overall business, let's take, for example, the overall business strategy part of the strategy might be to continually enhance operations and find efficiency in everything that we do. And there could be some KPIs kind of linked to that. The forcing function of ensuring that the right people in the different parts of the business then engage with technology in a way that enables that is the part that I think maybe it's not then an organizational AI strategy as much as how do you operationalize AI as one of, exactly as you described it, one of the tools or one of the enablers of kind of the efficiency gains that you're trying to achieve. Now, what's novel here to some extent is that there's domain-specific knowledge and there's an adoption curve. So while people come to terms with understanding how it's new, it's 2 years old. I mean, AI, as you well pointed out, isn't new, but LLMs are, and I'd argue to some extent LLMs in the loop of automation, which is really where a lot of the efficiency can happen, are relatively new. So a model that could potentially sit alongside what you described in, which we think could work well, is one where in the initial stages of trying to get that knowledge gradient right, trying to make sure that you've got the right advocates and practitioners in the organization, is you set up a core in the organization, which is effectively a center of excellence. And inside that center of excellence, while this learning curve is so steep, you've got dedicated people in the business whose job it is to ensure that they understand all of the technology and they understand that technology really well. They then need to go and find counterpoints inside, let's call them lines of business or functional areas, who then advocate for and cascade that knowledge and information out into the respective domains that they look after, where the individual or the respective application will be nuanced and different. So whether I'm, maybe I'm trying to generate better sales lead or I'm trying to optimize the human resources function, I know that I need to get to cost savings and increases in revenue in the respective areas, but the how of how the technology works and operates initially lives in a core. Once the standard of the organization gets to a level of sufficiency where it becomes truly embedded, you could then potentially dismantle that structure. But we think that something like that is a necessary intermediary step as the organization goes through kind of the dynamic that's happening at the moment in the market, where there's kind of the shock that's happening, there's new knowledge, there's new skills that need to be learned, and you have to drive it out into the different parts of the business to possibly enable the overall business strategy.
I've seen that as well, and thank you so much, for looking at it from that angle. The Center of Excellence model works extremely well. We saw it when even before this new generation of AI, right? I've seen companies setting up data analytics center of excellence, especially when you start to accelerate towards, advanced analytics in terms of prescriptive analytics and predictive analytics. The complexity just increased, and it needed that kind of focus. And we've seen, organizations even do that even now with AI, right? It does help improve adoption. It also helps, to get beyond the hype. It solidifies the tangible value and gets you to get both, the organization in totality, but, the intended area of transformation to get just beyond that initial excitement around AI to sustain the adoption.
One thing I want to touch on is you mentioned the sort of ownership of use cases and the practical execution of those. In these models that you're talking about, where does that sit? And if I can just reference, for instance, a previous company I worked at had, they did this whole scaled agile type of philosophy where they basically take agile and try to scale it across the entire organization with massive cross-functional teams, because they had a mandate of digital transformation that they wanted to fulfill, but they felt that by leaving the project ownership and execution to the individual department to run their own projects, it didn't go at the speed at which they wanted, and there's a little bit of a lack of cohesion between the different projects that are being executed and how they fit together. And what they did is they sort of created a project office, and then the project office had a dedicated function to run these and then take people across the business from the different functional areas to comprise the development team. And I think that worked to accelerate the development at that specific company. But if I had to reference another experience I had where something similar was attempted at an insurer, it was met with a little bit of resistance, because you can imagine developers and data scientists now having to report to project officers, and especially when there wasn't before. You just had your internal project team within data science, within development, but now you have to sort of deal with a lot of people who didn't have to before, and a little bit of bureaucracy, I guess. What's your view on what's the most efficient way, or maybe it does depend on the company, in terms of who owns the project execution for these generative AI use cases? Is it a dedicated centralized project office, or the individual business units that should self-manage that?
I think I've seen it working both ways. I'm working with a retailer now where the ownership of the project sits within the Center of Excellence. And from an execution perspective, in terms of translating the business strategy into, the use case and how to unpack it, and how they partner, even how they bring partners to come and help, execute. But I've seen them having also a very structured way of bringing the business into that particular process. So it's so connected that everything happens, intertwined with the rest of the business, but led by a COE. I've seen that working very well. In financial services, we've seen in the line of business, in transactional banking line of business, for example, ownership sitting inside transactional banking in terms of what they want to do, in terms of they're transforming some of their products that they're doing, and doesn't necessarily sit in a COE at a group level. And I think the maturity of the culture of the organization, I think, ensures success for both, whichever is the chosen one. I always say, if you have established people, process, culture components, whichever model you choose, your culture helps you deliver in your organization. I've seen people with consulting houses come in, put in the right guardrails, put in the right processes, and culture kills all of it. So in many cases, we get involved in the culture conversation in terms of how to drive the right innovative culture, and how consulting houses such as yourselves begin to help us to accelerate initiatives by coming in to look at process, people, culture. I've seen projects delaying. I've seen things just falling apart, not because the technology was bad, not because the execution was bad, but the totality of the environment was not conducive for that. So I think if we get the culture and the people piece and the process piece right, we can make the different models, work together towards the outcomes.
I think that's so well said. I think practices of change management and people advisory need to be really elevated in these processes, because that's what it is, right? We're talking about shifting the inertia of a business in a different direction, and that makes people insecure. And managing that process is critical to whether or not you're going to be able to capitalize on the technology gains. Josh, just to your point about center of excellences and whether or not these things should be federated into the lines of business or to me, that answer is like an overwhelming yes, that in highly specialized domains, the center of excellence should always outperform a domain-specific area in a business. The question is just whether or not that center of excellence truly is the center of excellence. So you've got to make sure that you have capacitated it correctly and it doesn't become a bottleneck, which is the alternative. But generally, there's going to be business nous inside functional areas in the business, but domain-specific excellence inside an AI/development team that knows how to exploit these things will unquestionably be the right theoretical model. It will come down to the execution, and I think Ayanda's pitfall around was warning about the pitfall of kind of cultural resistance is absolutely critical and very well said. Something we're fascinated by, Ayanda, and you're obviously deeply connected to this, is obviously the Microsoft Ignite event last year. Some big announcements were made, Copilots. A couple of thoughts. I mean, the first is really how are you guys kind of using Copilot? What are you seeing as a business? And how is Microsoft embracing Copilots?
I think it's been good to see the adoption internally. And we've been very also intentional around education. And you would think, I mean, we're this big tech house, right? You just put Copilot there and people start using it. It takes intentionality in terms of driving it. And once people start using it, it is phenomenal how it accelerates your productivity. Absolutely phenomenal. I can't live without Copilot today. I was working on a document just a few days ago, and it's a customer strategic document. They've got these, and then I asked Copilot to say, hey, look through this document and give me their strategic priorities. So it's a strategy document. It comes back with these 10 priorities and with the description. And then I said, okay, can you please map the right Microsoft solution place to each of those priorities and give a description, and also start to bring possible use cases for that. I mean, in a few minutes, I had mapped a customer strategic roadmap to Microsoft product set, all in Copilot. Right?
Did it say here's points 1 and 2, ... work out the rest yourself, or did it give them all to you?
No, gave them all to me. So I've got GPU power, right? So
oh, right. Okay, nice.
Yeah. So and for me, I mean, it's a desktop exercise maybe that somebody could have taken for time to run, right? But once you start to get the power of Copilot, and simply because we've positioned Copilot in the market as your own virtual assistant. So and the reason why it's even Copilot, because we want to dehumanize AI, right? And remove this notion that AI is here to take our jobs. AI is here to enhance what we do. And what a desktop exercise that I could have sat there and took 2 hours to do and read through this document and do this, it's now taken me 10 minutes to do. And now I need to just focus on, am I solving the right problems, right? This is where the creativity comes in, not the mundane task of going through voluminous documents. This is where creativity comes in. So it allows me to remove the mundane task, allowing me to focus on creativity, which should be, the things that we do as humans. And they might say, some of these AI models are creative. I think creativity still lies with us, right? We still the brains behind everything. So it frees us up time to be able to do that. But I've seen it, and also what we do. I mean, you would have seen it in Teams, right? It's absolutely phenomenal when you've got a clashing meeting. You just jump into a Teams meeting, and then you say, "Can you please recap what's happened so far in the meeting?" And then it begins to tell you that so and so said this, so and so said this, and this is what is there. Were there any task for me while I was away in the meeting? And then it begins to tell you that, hey, it might seem simple, but it saves a lot of time. Now I don't need to go and listen to the whole meeting. If I miss the meeting, to listen to the recording. I don't listen to recordings anymore. Copilot begins to help us. I've seen organizations now, they're starting to accelerate Copilot at scale throughout the organization. It's no longer, initially when the requests that were coming in for Copilot, it was for leadership and executives. And I think it's starting to see that actually, no, you want your entire workforce to have that capability in terms of driving efficiency. So Copilot is really democratizing access to AI. I mean, it's AI that doesn't feel like,
well,
AI.
And it's democratizing excellence. Anybody can become excellent in their domain by having an AI tool by their side. I've got one more question, and then I really want Josh to take us into Fabric and kind of understanding Databricks and some of the things that are going on there. But we're just curious about the AI strategy around all of these different types of Copilots, or the Microsoft strategy. And I mean, as much as you can share, I could sort of imagine a world where there was just sort of a Copilot built into no matter what you're doing. So rather than having sort of specific Copilots for specific things, you could have had sort of one central. It's like the Microsoft paperclip, but on steroids this time for absolutely everything. Why has it gone that route? And is the roadmap ultimately collapse this into sort of a super Copilot? Or just it would be interesting to hear your thoughts on this proliferation of lots of different Copilots versus one big one.
I think it's about Copilot where you are, right? In whatever, in our SaaS solutions, because remember, our customers consume our Microsoft 365 solutions, differently depending on their needs in terms of what they have access to. So we're making Copilot available for each and every persona in the organization, whatever they're using, so that people can choose what they use and not necessarily bring it all together, and then you're forced to have these 10 Copilots and you only use 3 of them. So it's all about using it. I mean, there's a very simple one, Windows Copilot inside Windows 11. A lot of times people don't know how to change to dark mode. You just type in there, say, please change my theme to dark mode, and then boom, you're in dark mode. It might seem very easy, but because we know where to go and do things, for people that don't, having this text field that I can just tell it what I want to do, and it's going to figure out, it's going to do it. And if we can't do it, it's going to tell me how to do it. It's really, really awesome. So the Copilot is always going to be rolled out in that manner where it touches each user at their point of need, where they're using. But where Copilot scales in something like Microsoft Fabric, right, or Microsoft Power BI, is that now you've got Copilot that scales through your entire data as an organization, whether that data is sitting in operational databases, is sitting in your ERP systems, is sitting wherever it's sitting. You have this Copilot that is pointing to this data source that is you are able to then drive productivity regardless of which end product you use, right? And then as well as, we've got something what we call Microsoft Copilot Studio, where you can build your own Copilots with your own data. It doesn't need to be, attached to any of the Copilots that we take to market. That way, if I, am a consulting house and I've got this repository of documents that I've built over the years, I can point a Copilot to that and say, hey, give us all the work we've done over the years for these customers and rank it by this and by this. All of a sudden now it's not sitting inside Microsoft 365. It's sitting outside of that. It's pointing to where you want productivity to come from. And this is really the game-changing thing about Copilot, that it's not locked to a particular system. You can have Copilot for whatever workload that you want to have Copilot for.
Fascinating. You mentioned Fabric there, Ayanda. I'd like to maybe spend some time on that. I think, if I stand corrected, either at the Ignite event or at one of the similar hosted events around the time that Microsoft Fabric preview was released, I believe it was called or heralded as the most significant data tool since SQL Server that Microsoft is releasing.
Yeah.
It's obviously a big claim because, I mean, I can't imagine an organization in 2024 without a SQL of some form or SQL Server. I was hoping maybe you can just touch on, for the audience especially, what is Microsoft Fabric and how does it sit alongside your likes of Snowflake or Databricks that others might be familiar with already?
Okay, so and the way I like explaining Fabric, right, is starting with the problems that we saw. Everybody complained about data silos. Everybody complained about the lack of unified data. Everybody complained about the disconnected platforms, whether you're talking AI, whether you're talking unstructured data, that in a traditional data warehouse, you couldn't bring in unstructured data because it was all about data structures, rows and tables. And we're now generating vast amount of unstructured data in whether through social platforms, or voice, video, and a whole lot of data that comes in. And Fabric seems to come and solve that data conundrum, right? In terms of having these multiple data sources. So Fabric is literally like a new platform that begins to combine data. It combines AI and then cloud capabilities to allow organizations to build these intelligent applications and solutions in a unified manner, right? But to do that, it leverages the evolution from data warehouse to data lakes to now lakehouse architecture, right? This is where we've evolved to, simply because a lakehouse effectively starts to unify the data management systems to support both the traditional data that we've always had, like structured data, as well as data that's coming in from streaming sources. There could be, streaming data coming in, as well as unstructured data types. So a lakehouse is really the foundation model for Microsoft Fabric. Now we build lakehouses in either Microsoft's native Synapse architecture, and Synapse has been around for many years, right? It allows data analysts, to be able to use the tools that they've used over the years, like SQL, Python, and other languages, in order to be able to deal with data and make these wonderful, visualizations, as well as some of the more advanced analytics and predictive analytics in order to deliver something. But also we use what we call Azure Databricks. So Databricks is one of the companies Microsoft partnered and heavily invested in, and it exists as a first-party service in Azure. So depending on the use case, we do build the lakehouse using Databricks. And Fabric then leverages the lakehouse in order to be the SaaS, software as a service, orchestration layer across the entire enterprise, regardless of the persona that's using the data. Whether you're looking at data engineers who are building all of these machine learning models, and they are ingesting data, they're using Data Factory, they're using many of these tools to engineer data, right? Or it's analysts who are actually querying and visualizing data using the lakehouse. Fabric has got all of those personas built into that. You might also have data scientists who are more AI inclined. They're using a lot of machine learning and they're building data science models using that. So Fabric became a platform to unify and bring it all together in a single platform, and have every single persona having their space in Fabric, enabled in the backend by lakehouse architecture. And that's how we position Fabric. It solves the problem that existed for a long time with the traditional types of architectures in data warehousing and data lakes.
Makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing I think I'm most excited, or one of the features I'm most excited to start experimenting with in Fabric is this thing called mirroring. Sorry.
Yeah.
And essentially, as I understand it, it's sort of is it quite a unique take on things where instead of making calls to where the data does lie in these disparate SQL calls to these disparate databases, which has a time component and a compute component as well, the idea of mirroring is essentially creating an identical copy of that data source within Fabric, where internally to this system, the querying will happen, which should speed up processing, etc. As I understand it. So I think that's that I think might have quite a profound effect on data migration as a whole, which we talked about earlier in the hybrid model. So
it does, right? And one of the other things that our from a hybrid aspect, I mean, companies have a hybrid cloud and also multi-cloud approach. Something exists in Fabric, we call it shortcuts, right? Where you have data sitting, you have your operational data sitting in AWS, in an S3 bucket, or sitting even in GCP. That data need not move anymore. If you built the old, data warehousing, you'll have these pipelines that move that data, and there will be egress costs. And many companies, the egress costs were quite high. It prevented certain use cases. And right now, we don't move that data. If we don't need to move that data, we're starting to work with operational data that's sitting in other cloud providers without customers incurring egress costs. So there's definitely a wide range of reasons why it's taken off the weight, is that it has simplified data warehousing as we know it, and data lakes as we know it into this lakehouse architecture. And also something that's there that many people know every day. I mean, you've got OneDrive, right, in terms of where you drop your files. It has simplified, especially for data citizens. One of the personas inside the data organization is not the clever people that sit in data science and machine learning, and it's the data citizens, the people that consume data. They now have access to OneDrive for data called OneLake. It simplifies ingestion, it simplifies data movement. It's as simple as dragging and dropping a file on a folder on your computer. So we're starting to simplify across the value chain, leveraging Fabric to do that.
Sure, that sounds absolutely fantastic. And I think the excitement of the moment is just profound. There's just so much we can be doing as organizations.
Yeah.
I mean, I want to thank you for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the pod. You've been a wealth of knowledge, and been fantastic to get a bit of a glimpse into what's going on inside the Microsoft world as well, and how we can together as organizations help our customers on this incredible journey. So thank you very much. Really appreciate your time.
Appreciate you inviting me. So I think it was a very fruitful conversation. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share, and thank you for your contribution as well. It's been really amazing. Thank you so much.